first name has a string or text. So it's a string format of Sarah. Then we have the last name Johnson. The email again is a string. The company is a string, and phone number here, we've chosen to store it as a string and not a number. But for example, you might actually have a data type that is a number instead for phone number, and we would just keep it like this. It depends on how your system receives that data. So, why do we actually care? Like, this all seems very technical. Well, if we understand the underlying data structure and the data types, then there are actually only a limited number of things that we need to learn to do in order to manipulate absolutely any data we can receive in. And if you think about it from a business systems point of view, we are connecting to multiple business systems, transforming that data and putting it into an output system, input, transformation, and output. So all we're trying to do is understand, how do I take a text or a number and manipulate it in the way that I want so that I can put it in the right format to put in this other system. That's ultimately all we're doing. So if we click into this second node, the dynamic data node, we can kind of expand on that a little bit by talking about how we pass data between different nodes. So I'm just going to pause there. This is a concept that, like JSON and dealing with the different data types, it might not come to you straight away. It took me kind of a month or two to properly understand the intricacies of this. But at a high level, it's just treat it like different data types inside this object. And we know it's an object because it's wrapped by these curly braces. And we want some way to manipulate that data and pass it between nodes. So if I'm connecting a flow between my systems by just dragging and dropping the arrow here, I want to actually be able to pull information from my input node here and actually manipulate that in certain way. So to demonstrate this a little bit, I'm going to come down here and I'm going to delete these workflow lines on this when clicking test workflow. And all this is, to remind you, is the manual trigger that says whenever I hit this button, I just save this a second. I need to make sure it's not deactivated. So I'm going to hit either the power button or that. Whenever this is activated, I can execute this workflow. So I'm just allowing it to pass the data between these. So whenever I click down here or click this orange execute button, it's now going to push data between these. Now, right now, I haven't asked in this dynamic data field for much information to be passed through, but I can see that in my inputs now are the outputs from the contact card. So we've run the contact card, and that has no inputs because it was just that trigger. We're transforming the data by just turning it into an object. And you can see that now we have the visual view again in the table of our data. So we have the columns, which are the keys, and the rows, which are the values. Sarah Johnson at example.com as the email. But when you're in the table view, you don't understand the data types. I don't know if this is a string or a number. So if I want to understand that, I can go to the schema and see it in the data types here, or I can see it directly in the JSON itself. And that will just appear as this JSON object here. Now, N8N wraps every output in these square brackets as well, and we'll come to what those mean. But for now, just treat it like this is the data we're passing, and it's just a JSON object. If we wanted to add multiple records to this, which we'll do later, then we'd actually have, in fact, I won't go over that right now, but we'll have basically this repeating. So we'd have another object, and this would be a different name, etc. So it'd be, again, multiple people in that contact card. And there's a way that we do that through this. But for now, I wanted to just touch on, before we go and run this for yourself, how we pass data dynamically from one to the next node, because we're always worried about actually passing this data and grabbing dynamic data rather than static data. So, of course, I can, if I just delete this name of fruits here, I could statically say that the last name is Johnson in here. But if I pass a different name through and I have Johnson as a fixed value inside this column here, Johnson's always going to be passed through. So say I change this contact card, it's actually John, not Johnson, and I re-execute this workflow. If I've fixed a value in here, it's always going to pull, despite this being now John, it's always going to pull Johnson through. So this is like in your Excel sheet, hard coding a value over a formula. That is the equivalent of what you're doing when you're hitting a fix in there. I'm sure many of you can relate to huge, complex Excel sheets and hard coded values that go over your formulas or anything like that. It's quite painful. As soon as we want to pass the data dynamically, we can either just drag it and drop like we saw last week, and you can see that I'm able to actually pick that up. And suddenly the fixed has gone to expression. So there are multiple ways we could do this. Instead of doing that, I could actually go back to fixed. I could just click the expression, or I can just hit equals on my keyboard and it already knows, like when we're typing in a formula, that it's going to be almost like a formula or expression. We want dynamic data. We want the data of whatever's being passed into it. So I can drag and drop like this. That's the simplest way to do it. Or I can just directly actually open these double curly braces and you see this turns to gray. And this introduces the concept of like passing data dynamically. So every time we want data from a previous node, we're going to always write dollar and $JSON. And you see when I type in dollar, and you'll do the same in a moment, it comes up with these suggestions. And $JSON is basically saying what is in the previous object. And if I open this little corner down here, I can see the result of that first contact that's being passed through. So on the left-hand side is my expression, on the right-hand side is the example result of that. So it's saying it's receiving an object, and we can see that by the curly braces. And the ID, the first key, has a value of 1, the first name a value of Sarah. So what we can do is actually say, okay, I just am interested in the last name here or the ID. So what we do is we basically dive deep into the object and all we use is a full stop for that. So whenever we hit full stop, we're basically telling it, jump one level deeper inside whatever you're searching. And you see when I type a dot, it's like it now has all the different field names. So say I want last name, I can either type in last name like that, and you can see it now pulls out John, or I can just put the dot and click last name on the screen and it's pulled out John. So dots are just a way to basically access that nested or underlying data. So when we say JSON, we're saying access it at this level outside of these curly braces. When we're saying dot, we're like jump into that object and pull an attribute or a value from there. So if I wanted email, JSON.email, etc. And you can see the results always show below as well. So you can see the first example there. Now, when you've got multiple results, you would be able to click into here and click actually, I want the sixth result rather than the first there. Hopefully that's making it a bit of sense. I now maybe we pause for a couple of minutes to give you a chance to actually explore this on your own computers, because it's all good and well seeing it on the screen, but when you're actually doing it for yourself, you might stumble upon certain things. So what I'd like you to do is just go and grab that manual trigger, which was down here, disconnect the lines that were on it, drag it up here, make sure it's activated by hitting the power button on it. And then what you can do is connect these nodes together, hit execute workflow, and you can have a quick play around. And maybe we say, actually, as a task, add a new field, type in company here, and work out how to get company into that value box there. Does that sound good? And then as you come up with questions, let me know. So I'll put on a timer for a couple of minutes. Maybe we'll do 3.5 minutes. And if you all have a go at doing that, then we can move on to the next concept after that. And whilst you do that, I'm just going to go and grab some water. Great. Thanks, Antonello. How's everyone else getting on? Did you manage to get company in the box? And I know at some points these seem like very trivial examples, but if you understand these bare bones concepts, you will find it significantly easier when you move on to actually building things that matter for your business or for your work life or your personal life. Once you've got these concepts, it becomes much easier. Yeah, that's right. Name of fruits is empty. Don't worry about that. We'll come on to that in a moment, actually. So let's move on. And we've talked quickly about the JSON object from the node prior. Now, most of the time, you'll be working with workflows that are, you know, 5 or 6 nodes connected together and much more complex node configurations. So, best practice is not to reference data by saying just pull data from the last node. It's to actually name the node you want to pull it from. So our original node was called contact card, and we're pulling data into the dynamic data field. So if I want the email, for example, I could say json.email because contact card is feeding in there. So I know it's the last JSON. But actually, a better way to do this is instead of saying $JSON email, I'm going to open the brackets and it's going to tell me all of the nodes that came before this one. I'm going to click on contact card. And then inside that contact card, I'm just saying I want an item from that contact card. And then the rest is the same, JSON.email. So all I'm saying is instead of pulling it from the last node, I want it from this specific node. Now, this is really useful because although it has the same result, if I wanted to put a node in the middle here, let's say I had a whatever action network node, and then I connected that to my dynamic data, I can still reference the contact card node here. Whereas now JSON.email will be trying to pull email from this new node in the middle. So if you can reference the specific node, you're going to have much better or a much better success rate, and you're not going to have to redo a lot every single time. So we're just referencing that. And you can even do that if, for example, this contact card was 2 nodes back and I dragged in company, for example, it would automatically put it in this configuration there with the contact card. So does it get any more complicated when it comes to data formats? A little bit, but not significantly more than we've spoken about. But if you think about it, data isn't usually one value, it's multiple items. So where we saw like one lead, Sarah Johnson in that list, you'd often have actually lists that have multiple leads. And we'll come to what this is in a moment, where we have a list of leads inside that. So we have multiple JSON objects there. But also, if you want a list of leads, you need to store it in a list or an array, which we've seen already N8N put in automatically, which is those square brackets. So you need to learn to understand the square brackets and the curly brackets there. So say, for example, in this fruit array, instead of in here having fruit as a string, we're actually passing an array, and we're passing in square brackets apple, pear, and banana, all as strings inside that array. And when I hit execute step, it's going to deliver me a JSON object with fruit as the key. And then inside that fruit key, we have an array which has one or 3 sets of values inside. So when we look at the table view, we can again see inside the fruit array, we have the 0th element is apple, the first is pear, and the second is banana. And then when we look at the schema point of view, we see that notation that we saw before, which just suggests this is basically a list of fruits. So we can access the 0th fruit, the first fruit, or the second fruit. And when you're dealing with coding languages or anything close to it like no code, everything always refers to 0 as the starting point. You never refer to 1. It's like 0 is always the index that we have here. But I could actually change that and say I want to pass this as a string instead. And if I pass it as a string, it's going to have a string characteristic that says apple, pear, and banana. Now, either is appropriate, and when I look at the table view, you now just see that it's like this one single row as a string. And then in JSON, it's also one single row compared to what we had before. But if I want to manipulate the object, if I want to grab, for example, just the first item in the fruits array, it's going to be extremely difficult or impossible to do that if we're passing that data through as a string. Whereas if we pass it through as an array, I can now basically just say I want the 0th item of the fruit object. So I can come here, click the plus icon, and this next one is called an edit fields or set node, which is what we keep using today. And it's going to start with the input, which we've seen from our fruit array, is this fruit array, quite literally. And then the fields to set, what we're going to transform here, we just want to grab fruit number, we'll call it 0 for continuity's sake. We just want to grab fruit number 0 from the fruits array. So what we can do is either go in here and do the same again, grab fruit number 0, or actually, again, we're seeing JSON dot, the key name, but here we've got this new notation, which is like dive deeper into the fruit array, and you only use this index notation with arrays, where you say, I want the third fruit, which would be the second index, or the first fruit, which would be the 0th index. And that is a demonstration of how you have more complex data structures and grab items from that data structure there. Now, with fruits, that's quite abstract. But the reason we might want, for example, sorry, jumping around a bit here. The reason, for example, we might want to use things like lists and objects within lists is that actually we might want to store different attributes about that. So fruit, for example, don't just have a name, they have a color as well. They have a size. So this is just a demonstration of in JSON objects, we can have nested objects. So this is still just the key, and this is the value inside the key. It's just the value is now represented by this array, i.e. list of fruits, but each fruit has multiple attributes. Multiple attributes are represented again by nested JSON objects. Now I'm aware this is like a little bit further than the level we were at a minute ago, but you can just see this as actually we're trying to work out how our input data looks so that we can work out how to grab the right things and transform it in the right way. That's all we're looking at here. So if we go back to the contact object, we can represent the same with our leads. So we have a JSON that's already built here with multiple leads this time. And if I execute the step, we can see that actually we have this large list or array of leads shown by the square brackets or shown in the table by the 0, 1, 2. And now we have not only Sarah, we have Michael, Jessica, David, and Emma, all with their individual attributes. So when you're dealing with real data, it's rarely this single, clean, easy to use data set. And it's often this nested set of data where we have multiple leads inside this object here. And we can see that in the JSON format, or we can see that in the schema format. And in the schema format, we can collapse each lead to show, exactly the data types, etc. Now, this is important for the next step, which is actually when we have an object like this, it's great that it's all compact, and that works really well for the system that's given it for us. But what we need to do is actually get the data out. We don't necessarily want to see Sarah, Michael, Jessica, David all in one object. We might need to manipulate it to actually get them, instead of this view here where we've got just one row with all of these different names, we might want Sarah in one row, Michael in one row, Jessica in one row, because that makes it much easier to us visually changing things and being able to manipulate it. So it brings us down to this data transformation section, and we'll go back up to this workflow quick tips in a moment, where we have this same set of leads inside the data. But actually now what we want to do is use some different transformations on that same data to actually grab the data and manipulate it in certain ways. So I'm going to go back up here and I'm going to grab the test workflow trigger. And what we are basically doing here is learning how to transform that data. So if I just run the test workflow, it's going to run this data. And again, we've got exactly like we saw before, the leads in this messy list that's quite hard to deal with. This is quite common when you're dealing with your systems. Your CRM will push out leads in this kind of format with loads of nested data that's really hard to work with. So we're going to use what's called a split out node, and you can access that by going to the nodes panel, going to data transformation. And then down here, we can either group things together or aggregate. group multiple things together, like merging them together, or split them out. So we actually want to turn a list into separate items. So we're turning that list of leads into something that's more manageable. So we're going to click on the split out node there. Just move this around. And inside that split out node, we need to understand which field we're trying to split out. Now it's very simple because we've only got one field which we're dealing with, which is leads. So what we're saying is grab any item or 0, 1, 2, these are the index items inside leads and split them out into all of the other fields. Oh, sorry, split them out into individual fields. So if I execute that step, what we now see is this horrible input, which is good for computer storage because it's in this like tight JSON, split out into a usable format where we can actually see the table rows identified as Sarah, Michael, Jessica, David, Emma. Much easier for us to actually deal with and manipulate specific items inside that. Now, if that's making sense, we'll connect it up and we'll start building a longer workflow here. And what we might do, for example, as a test manipulation is we've now got those individual items or individual leads in this data format. And we can see that quite cleanly in the table format. Now, if I don't want to, if I want to go to the next node, I don't have to click out onto the canvas and click on the next node. They're usually the prior node is on the left, the next node is on the right. So I can jump into the next node. And I might, for example, need to bring together the first name and last name separated by a comma inside this next node and add that to the data we've currently got. So this is an example transformation that I might do. Say, for example, I'm building out a set of emails that are bespoke to each individual person's name. And I'm actually starting the email by saying, hey, first name, comma, surname, for example. Then what I would do is just say, as we did before, add a column name. We'll treat it like a string, and we can drag in the first name. We can put the comma in between and the last name. And then by ticking this box, include other input fields, it's saying don't just output the first name, comma, last name. If I don't tick this and I run this, it's just going to output the full name. So we've changed our data entirely and haven't carried through all of the data that existed. So if I click include other input fields and all of them, I'm now going to have all of the columns that we had before, plus the new column that I've transformed or made for that data. What we might then want to do is, if we're putting it back into our CRM or system, we might have to bring that all back together. So doing the reverse of what we did in the split out here is the aggregate node. You can see that by the symbols exactly the same, but the other way around. And all we're doing is saying, again, we are trying to combine all of the item data that we're receiving into one output field or one list of leads. So if we execute that step, we've now got almost the exact same data we had before with the array 0, 1, 2 items, etc. But now we've actually transformed the data. We've added a field to it, full name, which is Sarah, comma, Johnson. So we've both taken a structure that was quite messy and split that out and flattened it into individual rows. And then we've actually brought that back together with an aggregate node so that we can actually potentially put it back into a grouped format inside our CRM or something like that. Now, you can do quite a lot of combinations of things in this edit fields node, but when you need something more powerful, you need to do something more powerful, you can use the code node instead. We're not going to dwell on that too much in this course, but we've got a specific course module in the classroom. I believe it's the AI Automation Masterclass. If you're interested in using the code node, we've called it the hardest node, week 2, section 11, and it shows you all the things you might be able to do or might want to do with that code node. But for example, inside this Cova node, it's literally as it sounds, it's code, it's JavaScript code. So you literally need to either use ChatGPT or something to write out this code node, which is very effective, by the way. As long as you know what you want to do and you tell it your inputs, you can get it to give you a new node, for example, or the code for inside of this. But we can achieve things here that we can't do with our regular functions. Now, we can achieve a lot with N8N without the code node, but in case you ever need to do something more, that's what the code node is there for as well. Any questions so far? Conscious that we've got a couple of minutes left, so I just want to show you some final bits to finish off. And I know today has been a lot of theory, but we'll be building on that next week and hopefully then starting to build out that social media content system once you've got down the theory there. Great. So hopefully you're not all asleep and you're paying attention and taking some of this stuff in. And of course, the recording will be available as well for you to go over. So I wanted to just share some very quick tips that are going to help you just gain some understanding of the fundamentals before we close off the call for today. But we basically have a set of nodes together here. And every time N8N runs, it runs left to right and top to bottom. So I have this route that's activated, both activated by a single trigger. But if you look at how it runs, it will run the left to right first and then top to bottom. The top one runs before the bottom one. So you can see this wait node, which just tells it to wait 10 seconds or 5 seconds, is still publishing. So I'll click it again and show you. Top runs, then bottom runs. However, if I stop that and I move this one and this one above, then those are going to run first. So top to bottom, left to right. It's all sequential execution. So by default, N8N will execute this node first, then this node, then this node, then this node. So you're not going to have this one and this one executing in parallel in the same window. You then have, for every input item, the node will run once. So you can see the items pass between them. You can see this says 1 item, 5 items. So this will be that data again of the leads that we've split out into 5 individual items. Now, what happens here, if we pass those 5 items into this node here, is we're actually asking, is first name equal to Sarah, let's say, and let's execute that again. What we're actually saying is, for every item that you receive, run this condition. So for one of those, that's true because we're passing through Sarah Johnson, but for the rest of them, that's false. So it's going to pass 4 items that way, 1 item the other. But however many we pass in, that will run. So that's important when you come to things like LLMs and AI agents, because you don't want to be running the AI agent for your 600 inputs. So you might actually use the aggregate node that we saw before, bring that data into one item so that the LLM can process it and then split it out afterwards. Now, it doesn't make much sense when you've got 5 and 1 here, but when you're dealing with actual business data, you often have, hundreds of rows, thousands of rows, and then it really matters about splitting out or combining that data. We've already seen that you can branch into multiple rows. And the benefit of that is you can take different actions depending on different circumstances. Now, if you want to run anything externally, i.e., you want it to run while you sleep, then you're going to need to actually publish this, and you need to make sure there are no node issues before you publish. So if I just zoom out and I just deactivate anything with a little error mark, then now the publish icon becomes available. And what this allows me to do is actually say, actually, this is scheduled to run every day at midnight. If I publish this now, every day at midnight, it's going to create an execution for me. And we'll come to that execution in a second. So every day at midnight, it's going to run without me monitoring it. Now, if I make a change to this workflow, I delete this node, for example, and hit save, it's not going to update my published workflow. I need to go back and actually publish that again and hit publish there. So there's a difference between your in production or your published workflows and what your work in progress is inside here as well. Only a few more things. You can see exactly what's run. So say I wanted this to run every day at midnight. Inside the executions panel, I'll see everything that I've run in the past. So all of the things, tests we've just run, the previous test here, if I go to one a bit earlier, you'll see that we were just running this individual node. So I can actually see the outputs and the inputs for that specific node. And if I want to actually debug, for example, say that node, that execution failed, it would appear red here, and I could copy it to the editor. I could go to that node specifically, and it now would have saved that data so that I can play around with it, retry it on that data that I'm trying to debug. So execution data shows us what has run in the past, including the ones that have run when you've not been there. When you've hit test execution, it's going to appear with this little lab symbol. Renaming nodes, we touched on this before, but when you start building bigger workflows, you really need to start naming those nodes. And actually, you can hit a spacebar on any node to rename those and just have a consistent way of naming those. If you want more info about this, we've got specific standards which we follow in the community, which I can link you to as well. And credentials, the final thing we'll finish on is something that you've already set up before, which is the credentials. So say, for example, I want to get data from my Gmail and get a message. Then I'm going to create a new credential. And when I save that credential, it is completely obscured from anyone seeing that credential. So if I send my workflow to you, like I have done today, I've shared my JSON data, which has all of these workflow nodes in, you will not be able to find my password in there. That is a credential that's saved on my system that only NAN has access to when it runs that specific node. So it's not going to share with anyone else. Whereas if I hard coded any credentials into the node itself and you share, that is then going to be shared. So credentials are a really important way to actually save your credential there. Quickly pause there to look at the questions, and if anyone has any questions, conscious that we've just gone over time. So hopefully that was super helpful for any of you that want to drop off now, and I'll stay for a few minutes to answer any questions as well. Thanks, Kamar. I will check my inbox as well for that question that you've asked. Antonello, when are we going to talk about Apify? So we've run out of time for today to talk about Apify, but what we will talk about next time is getting data externally, and HTTP requests are basically the way that we interact with APIs that are outside of the built-in nodes inside NAN. Now I can link you separately to a tutorial in the community here that talks specifically about Apify. If you go to the resource hub, then we have Scrape. Under operations, we have Scrape using pre-built scrapers, and it has a link to this module here, Scrape anything using Apify. So you need to understand the basic level of how API requests work, but once you understand that basic level, you can watch this 7-minute tutorial and it will show you how to get almost any data from the web. So you'll be on a website called apify.com, and say you want to scrape, I think it was Instagram, wasn't it, Antonello? You can type in Instagram, and that video will show you how to connect to any of these actors. They're called actors, they're just scrapers. And you can see this one's got 170,000 users, 5 stars. You go into that scraper and it says actually you're going to get 1,000 results for $1.50. But the benefit in Appify is you can actually start for free. So every time you start for free, you get $5 a month to use towards those credits. So you can play around with a lot here. You can get like 4,000 results in that free $5 a month. So I'd highly recommend once you understand HTTP requests, which we'll talk about next week, going to this video or just giving it a try before then as well. Great stuff. If anyone has any questions, then feel free to pop them in the box. And hopefully, that session was useful. Next week, we will continue to cover the rest of the fundamentals, including moving on to AI, as well as accessing external data. So, this scraping stuff. And then hopefully, we can start on the bigger builds where we put all those fundamentals to an actual use case as well. You're very welcome, James. Thank you. Thanks, guys, for attending. Looking forward to the next one. See you in the community in the meantime. Thanks, Naful. Thanks, Kamar. Great stuff. Thanks, Antonello. Bye, guys.